So let's jump in. We read in chapter 19, starting in verse 3. Then Moses climbed the mountain to appear before God. The Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "Give these instructions to the family of Jacob. Announce it to the descendants of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you'll be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on earth, for all the earth belongs to me, and you'll be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. This is the message you must give to the people of Israel." Now, the word covenant in Hebrew is the word berit. It refers to binding agreement, a sacred promise. So it kind of makes sense. We kind of think of those things when we think of covenants. But berit actually carries this ancient idea of to cut a deal. To cut a deal. We use it in English today, to cut a deal. Do you guys know where we get this phrase, to cut a deal? It actually comes from this Near Eastern idea of covenants. It comes from this ancient word in Hebrew would be karat berit, which is to cut a covenant. So to cut a deal is to cut a covenant. That's where we get that phrase. And the Near Eastern culture, making a covenant often involved, now as modern readers, this will be like, what? But this was the reality. Making a covenant involved cutting animals in half and passing between the pieces and the guts, symbolizing a serious binding agreement. This ritual represented parties' commitment to even implying, made happen to me as to this animal if I break this covenant, if I break this sacred deal. It is a serious commitment, indicating sacrifice, economic loss. An animal was killed, embodying a reality that in and through life we commit to each other. So berit, from the ancient Near Eastern practice, relates to this, often found in business, legal, and marriage agreements. Think how significant this is. God invites the people to make this berit, to make this covenant, a marriage of sorts with him. God's rescue is to form a different kind of nation, a holy one, shaped not by greed, not by violence, not by abusive power structures, but rather a nation shaped by compassion, justice, and care for one's neighbor. Again, God is signaling a return to Eden, return to the garden, to the ways and purposes of God. If you agree, if you step into this, you will represent me. And so he says these things to Moses to share with people. Moses goes down and people gather and we read, God says, "I am the Lord your God who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery." The only way for you to understand the terms of the covenant that are coming is for you to understand the relationship we have. I am the God who rescues you. Your story is to be rooted in the act of deliverance. Your story is to begin that I am the Lord your God who rescued you from slavery. So the first commandment instructs, you must not have any other God but me. Have no other gods. Their humanity is directly connected to the ability to remember their liberation, right? We said this, this is the building of the story, is their salvation is built on the gift from God who rescued them. This grace comes from God. If they forget God, the true God who freed them, they are at the very same moment forgetting their story. And if they forget their story, they might forget what it was like to be a slave. And they might find themselves back in a new sort of slavery. And this matters to us as well, doesn't it? Because when we forget our image-bearing reality, when we forget our story, we too can find ourselves in all sorts of slavery. So he says, don't have any other gods but me. Don't forget your story. And the second commandment builds on the first, right? You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in heavens or on the earth or in the sea. The second commandment is prohibiting them from making an idol for themselves. And as modern readers, we can quickly skip over this one and go like, check, that's good. I don't usually fashion an idol out of wood or metal or whatever. But hold on. Let's take a closer look. What is this command all about? Well, people are not supposed to make images of God. Why? because God has already made images of himself. God doesn't need images in form of wood, stone, or marble because God has made people. God has made us in his image. We already reflect. We already image him in partnership with him with potential to create and help creation flourish. So here at Sinai, God is reminding them of Eden, their purposes, their identity, their story. God is inviting these people to be priests to show the world what God is like through their lives, through how they bear the image. Don't make another image. Don't make another Egypt. Don't make another thing you're going to follow. You already reflect God. Come back to your story. So the command about idols and images leads to the third commandment. You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. The prohibition of misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Hebrew word for misuse here is nasa, which also carries a translation to carry. So God has redeemed these former slaves and is now inviting them to be representatives in the world. How will you bear God's image in the world? How will you carry it? Will you act on the behalf of the poor and the oppressed? Because that's what God cares about. How will you carry the name? Or will you misuse his name by ignoring and not helping people be redeemed and renewed? Will you ignore the cries of the oppressed? Will you misuse God's name by not carrying his name, by ignoring what matters to God? God always hears the cries of the oppressed. How will you carry God's name? How will you bear his image? And then the fourth commandment. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. God says, remember to take a Sabbath. Remember to take a day each week to not do any work. Again, at the heart of this command is an invitation, isn't it? And we have all said along the way in this series so far that the reason we're studying Torah is because if I want to follow Jesus, I need to understand the story he believes he's part of. And Jesus speaks about Sabbath many times. In fact, it's a recurring theme in the Gospels. The Sabbath is central to several key teachings and encounters that Jesus has with people. Look at what and how Jesus profoundly unpacks Sabbath when he's confronted by religious leaders who took the Sabbath very seriously and very literally. He says to them, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. Why does he say this? Jesus replies this way to a people who took the commandment very seriously. Friends, the reason the Sabbath is so important as we learn to be human in the Ten Commandments is in Egypt, when they were in slavery, Israel worked every single day without a break, being treated as objects to be exploited. The Sabbath then is a command to take a day in your week to remind yourself that you aren't in Egypt anymore, and the values of Egypt are not going to rule your heart, that you're not going to be counted as worthy by what production you make or how productive you are. Their humanity will not be judged by their usefulness of how they produce things. It is a reminder that your body, soul, and mind matters to God. You were always made to be his partner. You were always made to be his image bearer. So it matters that you rest. And it matters that you allow others to rest. Sabbath, like the rest of the commandments, is to remind you of your humanity, not to fall victim into slavery of production, or worse yet, seeing others as means to production for you. Do you see how all these commands will keep going, and then how we love our neighbors when we come to Jesus? All of this is echoing this story, this setting of Egypt. If they begin to oppress, if we begin to oppress, God says that I will hear the oppressed cries. I will hear and I will respond. The warning is sharp here. Don't become another Egypt. Don't become another empire who will use and abuse, because God acts against these structures. Jesus says, join me. Don't forget your story. I want to rescue you, and I want to help you, and I want to, with you, help rescue others. Lakeview, we have a question to answer. Will we join God in the rescue mission? Will we know our story and step into our calling? Will we hear the cries of the oppressed?